Hi everybody, Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, and today's contract tip has to do with exhibits and contracts. So are exhibits part of the contract? Do they need to be attached? Do they need to be signed? Do they need to be initialed? All of those questions will be answered. Stay tuned to the end of the video. So, as I always teach in my videos and in my classes, the contract is nothing more than a set of instructions. So for any answers you have to any contract, the first thing I encourage you to do is read the contract and see what the contract says about your particular question. So, and every contract might be a little different. Now, that's not to say there's not contract law in Georgia that will override what's in a contract. But for you as a real estate agent, read the contract and see what it says. So when it comes to the topic of exhibits, let's see what the two primarily used contracts in Georgia say. One is the GAR, Georgia Association of REALTORS contract, and the other is the RE Forms contract. So let's look at the GAR contract first. So the GAR contract, in the purchase and sale agreement, which is F201, under paragraph C8, where it says exhibits and addenda, it specifically says all exhibits and or addenda attached hereto, listed below, or referenced herein are made a part of this agreement. And then it goes on to say, if any such exhibit or addendum conflicts with any preceding paragraph, including any changes thereto made by the parties, said exhibit or addendum shall control. But the important thing is, all exhibits, and then underneath that paragraph, it has a checklist of exhibits where it has all cash exhibit, backup contingency, so forth and so on. Let me read that again. All exhibits and or addenda attached hereto, so that would be them attached, listed below, or referenced herein, are made part of this agreement. In the RE Forms contract, in the actual purchase and sale agreement itself, which is RE 100, contract for the purchase and sale of residential real property, under paragraph 9, exhibits, it says the following exhibits are attached to and made part of this offer. The provisions of any exhibits attached to this contract and reference below shall prevail if in conflict with the provisions of the contract. That's a very different statement than the descriptor of that paragraph in the GAR contract. However, also in the RE Forms contract, the contingencies that are in the purchase and sale agreement, the buyer's right to terminate contingency, the appraisal contingency, and the financing contingency, which are contained in the contract itself, that part states, hold on, let me find it. So those contingencies are, the fill in the blanks are in the actual contract, where you fill in the time frame from the binding agreement date, how long that contingency time frame runs. But in the standard terms, which is RE1, under that, the explanatory paragraph about those contingencies, it specifically states under each one of those contingencies that if this contingency is not selected, this section shall not be deemed part of the contract. Back to GAR. Let's go back to the GAR contract. Let's look and see what it says in the counter offer. Well, before I do that, let me just explain a little bit. So what that means, what does all this mean? It means if the buyer and the seller are binding under the GAR, Georgia Association of REALTORS contract, if there is an exhibit that is referenced in the purchase and sale agreement itself, so the purchase and sale agreement will be signed by the buyer and the seller when you have a binding contract. If there is an exhibit that is referenced in the purchase and sale agreement, it is incorporated and is part of the purchase and sale agreement, regardless if that exhibit in and of itself is initialed by the buyer and the seller. Now, for customer service reasons and to make sure everyone is on the same page, as a real estate agent, I strongly suggest, as a broker, that you incorporate, that you attach those exhibits to the purchase and sale agreement. Nevertheless, it in the GAR contract, it doesn't say that those exhibits have to be attached. It says if they are attached, listed, or referenced, then they are incorporated into the purchase and sale agreement. Likewise, in the GAR contract, in the counteroffer form, the counteroffer form is let's see what it is. It is F-249. It specifically states under paragraph C, effects of this counteroffer. When this counteroffer is signed by the buyer and the seller and a copy of the same is delivered to both parties, the original offer, as modified by this counteroffer, constitutes a legally binding agreement. Since the original offer, including all exhibits thereto, is incorporated by reference into this counteroffer, only the counteroffer needs to be signed to create a legally binding agreement between the parties. So what does that mean? That means if the parties are using the GAR contract package, there's an original offer with exhibits that, an original offer would, generally speaking, be initiated by a buyer, signed by a buyer, sent to the seller. If the seller is going to make a counteroffer, they're going to do so on this counteroffer form. If they make an acceptable counteroffer back to the buyer, that counteroffer is the only document that has both buyer and seller signatures on there. The seller never goes back and signs an original offer, nor the original exhibits. Now, your lenders have a cow over this, and I've done previous videos on that, how to address that issue. But my point is that in the GAR contract package, based on the verbiage and based on what the buyer and the seller agree to, the exhibits just need to be referenced. The exhibits do not need to be specifically initialed. As a broker, good customer service, make sure everyone's on the same page and avoid any issues, I strongly suggest you go ahead and attach the exhibits. Now, if you're binding under the RE contract package, the verbiage of the counteroffer is the same, that incorporates everything that was in the original offer that was not countered. So it only the counteroffer needs to be signed. But in the RE Forms contract package, that verbiage is not the same under the exhibit section. So you would have to attach an exhibit for it to be part of the contract. Likewise, the contingencies that are built into the purchase and sale agreement under the RE Forms, paragraph 6, even if you fill in the blank, even if you fill in X number of days from the binding agreement, let's say buyer's right to terminate, you fill in 10 days that the buyer has the right to terminate within 10 days from the RE Forms contract talks about it as acceptance date. It refers to binding agreement date. If that little checkbox is not checked, even if you have filled in the blank, it is not part of the agreement between the buyer and the seller. I just want to add a point via voiceover to insert right here that likewise, if there is a document that is attached or sent as part of an attachment with an offer and the exhibits, but if that document is not referenced within the body of the purchase and sale agreement, it is not part of the agreement between the buyer and the seller. For example, let's say that there is a seller's property disclosure form that is sent along with the purchase and sale agreement and any other exhibits and signed in a binding contract between a buyer and a seller, but that seller's property disclosure form is not actually referenced as an exhibit to the purchase and sale agreement, even if that form is filled out and completed and signed by the buyer and the seller, that is not part of the agreement between the parties. Bottom line, number one, make sure you read all your contracts. Number two, make sure you provide as much and all documentation as is agreed upon between the buyer and the seller to make sure everyone is on the same page and to avoid any issues. Number 3, if you go binding on another contract package, like a HUD contract package, new construction, you need to read through the purchase and sale agreement and any exhibits and addenda to see how this issue is addressed. Thank you guys so much for watching. Dave Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education.